The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our sixth and final webinar for the GISS Refresher series for 2021. Hope you've all have been enjoying them. My name is Skip Adel, and today we have a really cool presentation dealing with FireNet365 and how we can share GIS data. Wanted to point out one thing before we get into this. So we have Jeremy Ruska and Kathy Hansen with us today. Kathy and I will be answering questions, and Jeremy will be doing the presentation. And I made a comment on this on the GeoNet post recently when Jeremy updated or posted the documentation, but we are having an issue with Park Service in particular with this workflow. The OneDrive application from FireNet is actually blocked on Park Service computers right now, and we're working with IT to figure out why and get that unblocked. So don't need to worry about asking questions on that. That's in process. So don't want to take away any from Jeremy's presentation though on that. So Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself and kick off the presentation?
Yeah, thanks, Skip. So this is Jeremy Ruska. I work for the Oregon Washington BLM State Office. Been doing that for about 20 years as a GIS training specialist. For fire, I'm on a couple of different incident management teams, PNW2 out of the Northwest, and a couple of the Alaska teams as well. And I've been doing fire for about since 2012 or 2013. So you've probably seen my name around if you haven't, if we haven't met in person. So a couple of things last year, as you know, OneDrive and FireNet in general were kind of new. When we started off fire season, I think it was in Arizona last year, we tested out this workflow and kind of got the kinks worked out. And I think we're in a pretty good place for it now. Obviously with FireNet and everything else, Teams and Microsoft related, it changes, it's dynamic. So as it changes, we'll update that document that I just posted earlier this morning in GeoNet. And there's a link to that. If you can see my screen now, at the bottom of the refresher page, since we're in the last session, hold on while I scroll. There is a link under the OneDrive Sync assignment to get to the OneDrive document. So in case you need to find that, it's there. It's also in GeoNet or Community that Esri's calling it now. So I'm just going to basically go through that document. You can follow along if you want. I'm not going to share the document itself on my screen because I only have one screen and it takes up a lot of space, but I'm going to work through that and just kind of to go through that and show you how to set up an initial incident to store your data in OneDrive. Like Skip mentioned, depending on your agency or depending on your computer that you're using, things could be different. And hopefully we get all that stuff straightened out before the season starts, but keep that in mind. Another kind of caveat to all of this is you really want to try to get an actual full named FireNet account. So not a guest account, not the other, non-full FireNet account. So your name, usually first name _ last name @ firenet.gov account for this to work. You can still see data and work with data that's shared through OneDrive in FireNet as a guest. You just don't have the full sync capabilities that you'll have if you use the full account. The first part of the document kind of talks about setting up teams and all that information. Most people by now, I think, probably have access to Teams either through their work organization for testing purposes. If not, you can go into FireNet and request access to a training incident that they have set up if you just want to mess around with that. Get a hold of me after this class and we can talk about that. If you do need a place to test, there is that available. So what happens, kind of the breakdown of what will happen is if you haven't been on an assignment yet. since we've started using Teams is you'll get assigned a team for the incident. So in this case, I have 2021 training incident. Let's think of that as the fire that I'm on. So you get assigned, you get ordered to a fire that will show up in your teams under Teams. Now, depending on how they set it up, you might not see all of the channels. So over here on the left, you can see that I have some hidden channels down at the bottom, and I did that on purpose so I could unhide them or show you how to unhide them. But so there's a plans channel that you probably want to show, and there's a situation channel that you also want to show. That the situation channel in this case is where we're going to be working with setting up our OneDrive and our sync location. The first step, which we did kind of back on day one of the refresher, was to grab the current folder template. So I have that set aside here, the 2021 template. So that's my basic folder template. And this is assuming, you know, you're the first one on an incident and this hasn't been set up already. If you're coming into an existing incident, this may already be done for you. So you want to make sure you check with, you know, the outgoing team or the outgoing GIS to see what they've done as far as sharing data. So right now you'll see there's nothing here. It's a brand new incident. This is situation channel. If I go into files, the only thing there is a test folder. There's nothing in this situation channel. So I know that I'm on the first one here. I'm new to this incident. And just like everything else in Microsoft and, you know, GIS, you can do this multiple ways, but the way the workflow works is if we click this open in SharePoint button up at the top of our files folder. So we're on the situation channel, we're in our 2021 training incident fire, under files, click open in SharePoint. And that's going to take you out to SharePoint to a browser, and you can see kind of here at the top, we're still in our 2021 training incident. We're under documents now, but there's that test folder that we also saw back in Teams. And there's a couple different things you can do here depending on how you want to organize things. We can put our template folder structure directly here at the root level of our SharePoint site. So I'm going to upload a folder, go back to find my template. Gives you a warning that you're going to upload all the folders in that folder. That's okay. That takes a minute and it'll show up there. So now if we go back into Teams and refresh, there's our template folder. At this point, we could rename it. As far as renaming and changing things, you could do that in Teams or in SharePoint. They're kind of linked together. We'll just leave it for this situation. And then inside of there, there's all the stuff, you know, that comes in the template folder. A couple kind of watch out situations here is when you post stuff in a situation channel, everybody on your team has access to it. So there's no way to block the default situation channel or lock it down from all the members that are on the team. So if I go back up to my fire and I click on an owner so I can see everything on this fire, and I click on manage, I can see that there's 35 other owners and there's 210 members. Now that's okay. That's probably, you know, the size of a big incident management team. So that also means that anybody else could go in here and mess with your data or, you know, delete things, add things, whatever they want to do. A way to fix that or to keep that from happening is to have whoever your owner is of the fire that you're on. So usually it's the plan section chief or somebody at that level. They can go in and create a new channel under your fire. So maybe you want a GIS specific channel just for your GIS workflow in your situation unit, for example. They can do that and change the properties of that channel to make it only visible to certain people. I did it both ways last year. It doesn't, as long as you know, people aren't in there messing around with stuff, it's not a big deal. We only had a couple, I think it was one incident where somebody went in and deleted our entire, you know, GIS folder structure out of Teams. And of course we lost all our data and we had to restore it. But that's kind of, you know, that's up to you. The other option that you can do, which also happened a couple times last year, is when you go into Windows Explorer and look at your OneDrive settings, which we'll get to here in a minute, you can see right now I have FireNet listed with the little kind of building icon next to it. Those are folders that are shared with me and with this computer, so they'll sync. I also have one that says OneDrive FireNet, and that lists a bunch more folders with a little cloud next to it. And that is my personal OneDrive storage space in FireNet. So if I went into here, where it says OneDrive FireNet, and pasted in the template, the 2021 template folder, and tried to share that, anytime I shared that with anybody, instead of having this path at the top where it says, you know, your username, I'm logged into this computer as Fire user, underscore, you know, the name of your Fire and where the location it is, your username would be, you'd be sharing a personal folder with everybody instead of the actual Fire folder. So it works, it just, you have to grant permissions to everybody else that comes onto that incident if you started off that way. So it is better to share it out from the situation channel or from a GIS channel within the actual Fire, so it goes on to each person as they show up. Okay, so we've got our data in Teams. And this is just the template folder, so obviously there's nothing in here, just all the template information. And it's also in SharePoint. Now before, if you're on an incident or you're going, you know you're going to an incident, a couple things you need to make sure you do if you're working on, you know, your government computer or you're already logged into OneDrive with a government or a personal account, is to go in and make sure that you're logged into only FireNet. So in this case, I'm going to go into my Windows search bar. I'm going to type in OneDrive. You'll see the OneDrive app. Also, probably want to make sure you have OneDrive installed already, but that shouldn't be a big deal. And when you click on that, it looks like it just opens up a Windows Explorer window, but it also starts with the OneDrive app, and you can see it down here in the bottom right corner, the little blue cloud. So if we click on that blue cloud, it'll open up the control panel. Let me move my sharing window out of the way. And you can see that it's syncing files. It says all files are in sync and that we're logged in. It doesn't really tell you much else when it's not doing anything other than, you know, everything's synced. If we go into settings, we can see that I'm logged into my FireNet account. That's the only thing on here. I'm currently syncing 2 locations, the NIFS support folder and my OneDrive FireNet personal folder. If I was logged into my my BLM account, that would also show up here at the top. So it would have OneDrive FireNet with my email address, and then OneDrive DOI with my email address, or USDA, or whatever it may be. That's my personal account. You want to make sure before you go on a Fire, if you have multiple accounts logged in, to unlink those accounts. If you unlink an account, it's not going to delete anything. It'll just stop that sync process from happening on that machine. It's kind of a pain because once you sign back in, it'll update everything that's shared with you in your BLM or USDA account. But you don't want to be doing that when you're on an incident, just because you're using up bandwidth or whatever else, trying to sync any other changes. If you go in here and there's nothing that shows up, you need to go in through the process of adding your account, logging in, choosing which folders you want to sync. Okay, so now I want to get this data that's in Teams and in SharePoint to start syncing with my computer. So to do that, from Teams, if you remember, when we got our data set up, we're under Files. Let's go all the way back to the Situation channel. 2021 template. I can click this button to open it in SharePoint. It'll open up the SharePoint page for this folder structure. I already have that open, so I'm just going to go back there and go into my template. So at the top, there's a sync button in SharePoint. So I'm going to click that. It's going to tell me that it's getting ready to sync. That's where, if you are logged into your other accounts, you could get an error there where it says it cannot sync to this folder because it's not in your organization. So again, make sure you log out of your organization accounts first. Once it's ready and you're all logged into FireNet, it asks you what you want to sync. So right now I want to sync everything in that folder structure. So 2021 template, everything's checked by default. And then down here at the bottom, it's going to tell you where on your PC it's going to save this information. So you can see it's going to go under C users. Fire user is the account I'm logged in with. FireNet 2021 training incident 2021 template. You can't read it all there. It tells you how big it is and how much space you have available. Usually a good idea before you go on an incident, or you at least have it in mind before you show up, is how much available space you have on your computer. I have 200 gigs available, should be fine. If that's a low number, you might want to free up some space, archive some old files or whatever you have on that laptop. And then I'll hit Start Sync. You get a notification down at the bottom that says you're now syncing. And depending on, if this is a new incident and you're just syncing the template, or if it's an existing incident and you're downloading all the data, that could take a while. So again, if you know you're going to an incident, get in touch with that GIS or the situation unit there that's on the incident and try to get access to that folder so you can sync ahead of time. As it's syncing, you'll kind of see it flashing down here in the corner. It's probably done already because there wasn't a lot of data, but the little icon will change to a little swirl. And if you click on it, you can see the last couple of files that were synced and how long ago. Now, OneDrive is supposed to work where you're logged in all the time and it's syncing all the time. So if, my coworker was working on, let's say this, GIS performance rating document, and they made a change, OneDrive sees that, resyncs the file, and it gets updated in both places at the same time, which is good because that way, if somebody exports a PDF, anybody else anywhere can go look at it if they have that folder shared with them and see that change. What OneDrive doesn't do very well is tell you when it's not syncing and when it's logged out. So you could be, in the middle of your map production run at night on a fire, and all of a sudden you see either a little error show up down here, or you'll get a message that says, 300 files are out of sync or whatever. It doesn't tell you that with like a pop-up. Sometimes it does in the background. You'll get this little message that I emailed to myself earlier that says, OneDrive isn't signed in. Please enter your sign in to start syncing again. That's good and bad because it's not syncing, but at the same time, it doesn't do a very good job of notifying you that. So keep that in mind. It's a lot like FireNet where you have to log in every day. It kicks you off supposedly on an 18-hour cycle, but it seems to happen, more frequently when you need it than not. So keep an eye on that. What we were doing last year was before we got into a big production run, or at some point during the day, we would just sign out and sign back in of OneDrive just to make sure it wouldn't happen during crunch time. So we're syncing. Now if I go back into my OneDrive settings, you can see that I have the 2021 training incident template listed there. It's not taking up any space because there's nothing in there, it's just a folder structure. So it's there and it's syncing. I'm syncing it, I own it, so it's kind of right now I'm the only person that's working with that data. So at this point, you probably want to share, unless you're there by yourself, you're probably going to share this information with somebody else, right? So maybe you have a crew of 3 other GISs that are showing up. You're the first one there. They're still traveling, or they're not leaving for a couple of days. We're going to go back into Windows Explorer. And again, just like everything else, you can do this through Windows Explorer. You could do it through SharePoint. You can't do it through Teams yet that I know of, but maybe that's coming. And now we have our new incident folder structure listed under our FireNet icon. We can right click there and say share. Actually, let's go into the template itself. Let's see, they just changed that. There used to be a share option right here, but we'll do it from the Windows side of it, or from the SharePoint side of it. So from SharePoint, disregard the Windows Explorer option. So we're in our template folder structure. We click the share button. And we can share it a couple of different ways. We can send a link to people. We can specify specific people. Right now you can see that it's shared with 4 groups over here on the right side. So if I click on those 4 groups, people, it'll show me that incident owners of my fire have access, incident visitors have access, read-only or view-only access, and incident members have edit access. So depending on who you're sharing it with, if you're sharing it with your other GIS specialists, obviously you want to have them to give them full access. You can do that through that share window. Once you do that, they'll get a message if you type in their email that says, this folder has been shared with you. Click here to see it. For them to get that to start syncing on their local machine, they'll have to go through that same sync process of going down, into OneDrive, picking that folder up and clicking the sync button. If you want to remove access from somebody, that's why I like to kind of do individual people instead of groups. So you can go in and say specific people, make sure you check allow editing, and then list out your names of people that you want to email that to. Especially if you're moving into another subfolder on your incident that's not open to the whole team, make sure you have individual users in there that can edit that data. They get an email, they'll get a link that says this folder has been shared with you, like I mentioned, and they can start the sync process on their own machine. So a couple other things. So if say I was a user and somebody shared something with me, to find that, maybe you didn't have the email or you don't know where it is. When you're logged in to SharePoint, so I'm logged into SharePoint with my FireNet account, we can check that by clicking on the little icon up in the right corner. There's my FireNet credentials. I can click on this shared with us or shared with you button on the left side, and you can see what's been shared with you. So that would show up under that location if you need to find it again. Again, if you're on your 2nd or 3rd fire for the year, you could have multiple fires listed there. Make sure you pick the right one that you want to sync, and then sync that folder through the sync process at the top. Just scrolling through some notes here. Couple other settings that you need to check or at least make sure of after you've started syncing is if we go back to Windows Explorer into our shared folder. So you can see right now there's a couple different icons. You'll see the little arrows, kind of circle arrows, means that it's refreshing. The little green dots means that everything's synced. So again, if we're working on our data, creating templates or projects or products, even PDFs, you'll see all those kind of refreshing as they get created in that folder. Another thing you want to make sure, and this is new as of kind of the middle of last year, is you have some different settings in OneDrive depending on what you want to do with, or that let you control what you want to do with your data. So if we go back into OneDrive settings, which I still had open, or we can get to from the little blue cloud icon, there is an option at the very bottom that lets you save space and download files as you use them. So instead of grabbing everything out of that folder structure, it'll only grab files that you touch, which obviously with Pro and geodatabases and all that is probably not a good idea. So you want to make sure that's unchecked. By default, for a while it was checked and then it started to be unchecked. So I'm not sure if that's a personal setting or if it saves it with your account, but make sure you're not using the files on demand option. That showed up kind of midway through last season. It used to be called something else and there was a OneDrive update and that changed, but make sure that that setting is not checked. That way you're downloading everything, everything's saved on your local machine, and as it changes, it gets refreshed. So once we create our data and we want to share it, this was kind of a big discussion earlier in the season about, when they're talking about, or people were asking if the FTP site was going away, how are we going to share data? How is that going to look? To do that, you can do that a couple of different ways. So let's say we wanted to share out all the data, and I don't think I grabbed the right folder structure because I don't see my products folder. But anyway, let me go back to Teams real quick. So let's say we wanted to share out this documents folder as a QR code. Or let's just do this. Let's say we want to have our QR codes are going to point to our folder structure on SharePoint that's getting updated every day. So we're going to create a new folder called QR code, or whatever you want to call it. And then from that folder, I can select it and click share. And this time I want to share it a little bit differently. I want to share it so that anybody with the link can see it. I don't want to allow editing. You could set a password if you want. Usually it's not password protected. And then click copy link. And this link now, if I take into a QR code generator, I can make that available for people to scan from the public and get access to that location. So the same thing like you would do with the FTP site, you can also do that through SharePoint and through the Teams environment. I won't do that because I think most people know how to do that. Just take that link out, create a QR code, and then you have a shared location to that folder. It also, on the right side over here, will show you that once that's been created, that you have a link here that anyone with that link can view this location. So there's a link giving access to it. That'll go away unless you say you want to discard or remove that link access. So that shouldn't change if you just refresh what's in that folder. So we got everything set up. You have your incident data structure set up in Teams. We have it synced in OneDrive with whoever you've shared it with personally by username, and we've also shared a link out to a QR code that we can update that folder on a daily basis for map products or whatever we want to share with the QR code. If the connection breaks, like I mentioned, so you get signed out of OneDrive, you're offline, or maybe ICP loses internet, people that are working in those shared folders will still be able to keep working. Anything they create or change gets saved locally until it can sync again. Obviously, if ICP is offline and you have some remote GIS workers that are still working, their data is still going up into OneDrive. It's going into Teams. It gets created. Once they get back online, everything syncs again, and depending on how much has changed, again, will depend on how long that sync process takes. Couple other kind of things that we've practiced already by going through the workflow and was mentioned a couple of times in the earlier sessions is that, you know, just like before when you're syncing your incident database back to the server, same thing kind of happens when you're working in Pro with a shared or synced folder that's shared through OneDrive. So you can't have, you know, two people editing at the same time, same location type of thing, or they'll run into some issues. Make sure you're kind of, you know, kicking people out to update the master, that sort of thing, like you would normally do. There are some additional notes at the bottom of the sharing OneDrive document that was posted earlier. You can look through those. There was some issues last year, like I mentioned, with stuff disappearing or, you know, things syncing partially and then getting disconnected depending on people's network connections. So you can look through those notes. When you're done, so we've gone through our whole incident, you know, you get reassigned somewhere else, or, you know, the incident's done and over and you want to stop syncing this information. The biggest kind of thing not to do is just to go into your Windows Explorer, find all your data, and delete that folder. That, since you're syncing, it sees that as a delete on the sync end of things, and will also delete the folder out of OneDrive. So that happened a couple of times last year. The nice thing about being in OneDrive and SharePoint is if we go into SharePoint, and I might not be able to find it now because nothing's been deleted, but there is a recycle bin in SharePoint. So if somebody accidentally deletes everything, we can go into the recycle bin and find it and restore it. So you can see there's a bunch of data in here that people have deleted. It tells you who did it, which is nice because then you have a person to follow up with about, you know, their best practices of working with data, and it tells you when they did it. So you can see that Ryan King came in here and deleted a bunch of stuff. It wasn't our GIS data, so that's fine. But if it was, we could go into the recycle bin, select each individual thing and restore it, which obviously, you know, if you're talking about geodatabases and project files, could take a while, but it's still there. Another thing along those same lines to keep in mind is that you probably want to still make a local copy or a backup of your data that's in OneDrive in case it does get deleted. Usually around transition time, or if people, you know, maybe a month after somebody was on a fire and they're at home cleaning up their computer and they go into Windows Explorer and they see all these fires that are still syncing and delete them, they could be deleting them from another team that's still working on that fire. So to do it properly and not mess with the data that's in OneDrive and Teams, we want to go back into our OneDrive settings. So the little blue cloud, click on settings, which I probably still have open, but there's our settings. We want to pick the folder that we don't want to sync anymore and click on stop sync. It gives you a warning that says, you know, it'll stop syncing. Copy of those files onto that will be left on this PC. So you'll still have the data. It just won't push stuff, any changes back up to the cloud anymore, and it won't grab any changes that are happening. So I click on stop. You'll see that it disappears from your list of locations that are syncing. It also doesn't have the little green checkbox next to it over here under FireNet anymore. Now I would still be cautious about deleting anything just because, you know, technology, who knows if you're actually deleting the right or wrong thing, but it looks like at this point I could click OK. I could go in here and I could delete this folder and it's not going to affect anybody else that's still working on that incident. Now last year a couple times we had an issue where, and I'm not sure if it was because of the size of the data that was in the folder or just network or OneDrive itself, but you'd go in and click stop sync, and then when you went back into settings, it would reappear again. So that stop sync button was a little sticky or something weird was going on. But I would suggest, you know, if it's not wasting a bunch of space on your computer, not to delete it right away, or make sure you check with the local incident, you know, the people that are still on the incident first before you start deleting stuff. Just good communication and good data practices. So we stop syncing. We can, you know, also we could log out if you're using a government computer and you want to switch back to your BLM or your USDA or whatever your personal OneDrive account. You could also unlink this PC with the unlink button, and that'll stop syncing all of the content that's, you know, currently syncing. So for me, that's the 3 folders that show up there on the left under FireNet. Again, it gives you the warning that the copy will still be left on the PC, but they will no longer be syncing anymore. If you have, if you want to keep that OneDrive connection, maybe there's, you know, like I mentioned, you're on your second or third incident of the summer. You have some data that you still want to use, but you don't care if you're getting, you know, all the latest latest copy of everything that's being synced. We could go back in and you could choose specific folders that you want to sync. So you can see right now for my, and this is just an example because this is my personal OneDrive space. Right now I'm syncing everything. Maybe I'm only interested in syncing this 2020 S341 folder. So we could uncheck everything and just check that one folder. It keeps that sync connection there. It'll keep syncing that folder, but everything else will be, you know, static from whenever you stopped syncing that location. So if you're interested in seeing which products are being created, or for example, on a fire, you could keep syncing the products folder, uncheck everything else, save some space, and not, you know, update those on a regular basis. And that's pretty much the whole, you know, setup document. I'm sure Skip's been answering questions hopefully as we've been going. There's also some additional information at the bottom of the document about if you want to try testing, some different things you can do for testing, setting up the template, setting up that sync process. You can do that in Teams, depending on your agency or depending on the level of access you have in Teams, just by going into an existing team or creating a new team if you have access. And so I could create a team called test, use that team for testing. Same thing within an existing team. I could go in if you're a team owner and you could add a channel and you could call it, you know, FireNet testing or OneDrive testing, and then test it that way too. If you don't have access to FireNet yet, but you do have access to Teams or an existing channel structure. Like Skip mentioned, there are some issues with Park Service right now and their OneDrive settings. You may see those come up in other agencies as well. I haven't seen it on the BLM side. I haven't heard of it from anybody else, but they're looking into it and trying to get that resolved. And then the very bottom of the document, after kind of setting up your data and testing, talks about just the different status options you'll see and some additional notes. Again, kind of the big things to remember, to recap, depending on where you share information, depends on who has access to it. So again, if it's one of the main channels that was created for the fire, everybody on the team or in that team will have access to it. If you create a sub channel, you can when the channel is being created or when the channel is requested to be created. So let's go back to there and add a channel. You can change the privacy so that it's only available to a specific group of people. So if you have, like I said, I haven't had issues with it yet, but if you have issues with, you know, somebody going in and deleting data, or you don't want everybody to have access to your GIS data that's on your team, which, you know, teams are different, but you can go in and create a private channel that you would save that synced folder into. Again, with that though, you have to worry about, you know, channel management and adding members and removing members that you don't want access, which usually happens during a transition, or if you get, if you're extended and get new people or whatnot. There was some issues also with the path name that gets created. So if we go back into Windows Explorer and look at my path, you can see that right now it's pretty long. I mean, it's not crazy long, but there is a character limit for some of the geoprocessing tools in Pro. So if this was, the entire Alphabet 2021 Fire, and we got it pretty deep into the folder structure, you can see the further we go, the longer that path name gets. There isn't really a good solution to that other than creating a local, workspace to do your geoprocessing that's way down at the C root level of your computer, and then moving stuff back up to OneDrive, because all the stuff that's in here after it says FireNet is kind of controlled by what they name the team and then what your folder structure is. So keep that in mind. That could cause some issues. It's not as big of a deal in Pro as it was in ArcMap. I know ArcMap didn't like long paths at all, or even less so than Pro. But if you do get geoprocessing errors, check that and make sure that those path names aren't getting too long. A couple other issues with Pro and OneDrive is sometimes, and not all the time, but sometimes Pro will prevent OneDrive from syncing. So you'll make a bunch of edits, you'll save your data, or you'll export a PDF, and having Pro open will prevent OneDrive from syncing. So all you have to do is close Pro and reopen it, and you should see your little OneDrive icon start spinning again, and that green check will show up next to features that are synced. Obviously, you need to be online, so if you have limited connectivity, make sure somebody either on the incident or remotely has access to all this information that does have a good network connection. If that's the case, there's a workaround where you could, create a separate folder where you're uploading information to instead of relying on that OneDrive sync. But I think internet connectivity is a known issue, and it's kind of a given anymore that obviously we need it. And then everything else, just follow the GIS workflow like you normally would. Instead of, pointing to your local machine, you're pointing to a different folder for all of your inputs and outputs. But if it's set up right, everything should sync and everybody should have access to it. And that's all I have.
So we got a couple questions, Jeremy. Let's see. First one is a question on a QR code folder. And I must have missed this too. So basically it says, so that QR code folder does not inherit the permissions of the parent folder, only shared with GISS, or did he create it outside of the 2021 template folder?
Good question. Yeah, so you can do, I think I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
You can create separate permissions for specific folders. So if we go back to, whoops, keep clicking the wrong place. I'll just do it through Teams. If we go back, there we go. So if we go back to our folder location, when you click that share button, with the link settings, so which it defaults to, you have the option of choosing what those settings are. So under link settings, you can say anyone with a link, don't allow editing, apply, and it generates a link for you. That's different than when we go into share. And obviously, you'd want to be inside whatever folder you were sharing. Right now, we're just sharing the entire thing. When we click on share, and say people you specify, that also gives them additional options. So depending on what you pick in the share window determines what action will be taken by whatever you're sharing. So you can have separate sharing options for the link versus specific people, or even people with existing access. You can take, edit, view, access away, or give it back. And then once you share it, over on the right side, it'll show you. So for our 2021 template folder, 4 people have access, or 4 groups have access because they didn't go through the whole sharing process of individual named users. But if we go into our QR code folder, you can see that this little icon that shows the link shows that one link is giving access and that our same 4 groups have access. So they are different kind of based on how you set it up when you click that share button. Hopefully that answers that.
Excellent. Next question, in the settings, the FireNet settings, I believe at the folder level, it says files on demand, save space, and download files as you use them is grayed out. And there were a few questions on why that could be.
Oh, so they don't have the option of clicking it?
No, several folks, it sounds like don't.
That's a good question. I would check the version, because I know no, it doesn't really tell you much. Just version 2021. I know there was a change kind of halfway through the season last year where different agencies pushed out different versions of OneDrive. But yeah, I don't know why that would be grayed out, other than maybe they don't have anything syncing yet. So maybe they don't have a folder that's syncing. I'd have to look into that further to see why it wouldn't let you.
And it sounds like that could be an agency-specific issue, especially if you're logged into, say, FireNet on, logged into FireNet OneDrive, and as well as your agency tenant. So if you have DOI, maybe that conflicts with those settings.
Yeah, it could be. Right now, this is what I see when I'm logged into just my FireNet account. So if you are logged in through another one, you could have, just like everything else, there could be some stuff that you're not allowed to select if you're logged into your agency computer.
Okay. So that'd be the first thing to look at, folks, would be that agency login. Make sure you're logged out of your agency stuff, then log into FireNet and then try that. Question here about geodatabases, Jeremy. Curious about geodatabase sync, the other incident data, for example. What if 2 separate users create new features, classes, and insert in a geodatabase? How does OneDrive deal with that sync without corrupting the data?
We didn't see any issues with that, and I'm not sure how it does it, but it didn't seem to cause any issues. Like I mentioned, it does. Pro does, even though Pro is more friendly with multi-user editing, it does still lock some databases at times, and it doesn't tell you that, but you'll notice that OneDrive isn't syncing. And then exiting out of Pro will release that lock. So I think probably the same thing if there's 2 users in the same database, and you run into an issue, I would try exiting out of Pro and seeing if that refreshes everything. We had, we used it on, or I used it on 3 or 4 incidents last summer with, multiple editors and multiple users hitting the same data at the same time, and we never got any database issues other than the normal, stuff that you see.
Locked geodatabases or something like that. So.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going down through some of the questions here. There's questions about account access, getting a FireNet accounts. FireNet.gov is the website. There's a way to request an account on there, and you need to kind of work through the process of requesting that account. Mention that you're a GISS. You need this for incident support. That should be the trigger to allow you to get a full FireNet account. You might have to have a little back and forth with the FireNet admin folks to talk to them a little bit about it, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, and I've talked to Tara was on a different call yesterday. She's one of the FireNet admins, and she mentioned that specifically, that they should grant you an account. Don't let them give you a guest account, because that doesn't. And that's, I didn't really mention that, but the difference between a guest account and a full account is you can still get to all this information. You can still see everything. You can still share it with guests. But if you're a guest and you click the sync button, you won't be able to sync. So you can still have it, access to it. It's just not a true sync like it is with a full account. So, I mean, there is an extra step involved if you're a guest of downloading it every time and re-uploading it back. So it's not going to automatically do that for you. It does work, but it's not really a great workflow, just because you're never, you're always out of step with the rest of the data. So yeah, I would push, if they try to give you a guest account, I would push for a full account. And I think, I mean, they always say they're out of accounts, but she made it sound like they would start giving them out again.
All right, 2 more questions about accounts. How can you tell if your account is guest or full FireNet? That would be if you have email capability, calendaring, all that kind of stuff, you have a full FireNet account. That's the way that works. And it's been a while since I've requested a FireNet account, so I don't know exactly how the request form looks, but single resources can request accounts just as easy as team members or whatever else. You just need to mention that you're a GISS, and that should work. Again, you might need a little back and forth with folks.
Yeah, I think there is an option there to say if you're on a current assignment or not. I think is probably where that question's coming from. They do give priority if you're on an incident, but yeah, I would just make sure you make it clear that you need access as a GISS, and that should clear that up. And then my screen, if you can still see it up in the right corner, if you click on your profile and you have a full FireNet, email address listed there, then you have a full account. If you were a guest, it would have like, your name and then parentheses guest. I can actually show you one real quick. If I go back into Teams and look at my members of this team, members and guests, scroll. So you can see all the guests. It shows up in your name if you're a guest. It'll have your name, parentheses, guest. So it should be pretty obvious if you're a guest or not.
Excellent. Another question here about if you create your initial folder structure in your own personal OneDrive before the team was set up, is there a way to transfer that to SharePoint team environment? Yeah, you could just copy it over. That's really the only option. You would have to just make a copy of that from your personal OneDrive, drag that into the SharePoint, set that up, and then start the sync process.
Yeah, just like you do with the template, it'd be the same. Instead of using the template, you're using the, whatever you've done so far.
A question here about if I'm logged out of my agency OneDrive, can I still get to my agency email via Outlook desktop app or that kind of thing? Yes, you can. When I logged out of my Park Service OneDrive last year, I could still get to all of my email and stuff like that. I use the browser for that, but you still should be able to use all the desktop stuff.
Yeah, you might see that pop-up box that says you're not logged in if it remembers your credentials. So you may see that more frequently that says you're currently not logged into OneDrive, and it's probably because it knows that you have an agency profile on there still, or that your PC is still linked. So if it shows up at the top as being linked, back under settings. So if I had my BLM account linked in here, you might get that pop-up window more frequently that says, you're not logged in. But as long as you have your FireNet one there and it's syncing, then you should be fine.
Cool, thanks. Question here about, or more of well, it is a question, I guess, and I'll just read it. I know last year we taxed the whole OneDrive setup in FireNet more than the system admins had really expected. There was some discussion a little while ago about whether our FireNet OneDrive would be beefed up a bit this year to handle using it for GIS data like this. Do you have any info on updates about that? Are the FireNet admins supportive of us using it, all the GIS data on incidents? Short answer is yes, the FireNet admins are very supportive of this. They are making a special case to make sure GIS folks get a full FireNet account in order to use this. I think it was a little unexpected last year to them just because everybody was in flux. FireNet was in Office 365 was new, that kind of thing. But no, they are supportive. They will be able to answer questions or support questions on OneDrive. They have Jeremy's documentation. We've had a lot of discussions about that. As far as beefing up the infrastructure, I don't believe there was anything done there, but I don't believe there needed to be because we're all using Microsoft's infrastructure on the back end. So.
Yeah, and you can see on my account there that I have just over 1,000 gigs of storage space for my personal space. So I think that's the same for everyone. We did do some testing on a fire in Alaska last year when we had a bunch of remote GIS spread out all over the lower 48 as far as network goes with syncing all the time. And there wasn't really a big difference between running a Teams call and syncing in OneDrive versus, Teams as far as bandwidth goes. It didn't seem to use a ton of bandwidth other than that initial sync. If you're coming onto an existing incident that has a bunch of products and a bunch of data that has to sync, that initial sync can take a while because it downloads everything that's in that folder structure. But if you can, if possible, do that before you leave to go to the assignment and get access to it early, that does save probably, a couple hours at least of syncing time. The other option is when you get there, you plug in your computer, you get access to the folder, and you sync it overnight to get up and running.
We had a question that deals with what's right up there on your screen right now. Why is your OneDrive not showing your BLM account? Answer is you logged out of your BLM account, so it's just showing your FireNet account.
Right, yeah, I unlinked it so it's not even trying to connect to it.
Yep, makes it a little easier. Question here, is the FireNet OneDrive technology being used as a replacement for local area network file sharing? No, it's an option for sure. Jeremy, any thoughts on that?
No, and I kind of mentioned, I didn't mention that specifically, but I did kind of mention backups. So that's still probably a good idea to have a backup somewhere, and that could be on your local area network. I know a lot of teams still have, external hard drives or servers set up. That's a great spot to put your backup. Still stay connected to that. They both. The disadvantage of that is usually that's only accessible to people that are on site, where OneDrive is in the cloud. So, if you have remote users or you anticipate having remote GIS support, then definitely putting that stuff on OneDrive gives them access to it versus trying to get them onto a local network remotely.
There was another comment here about having the incident geodatabase emptied, I'm assuming deleted, because one of the GISS stopped a sync, not knowing, and I'm guessing it stopped a sync when they left the incident, not knowing that it would have an effect on that cloud drive. So that's really critical. Jeremy, in his document, mentions how to disconnect correctly from that folder so that you don't end up deleting anything on your way out the door.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind there is to remind, if you're transitioning with a team and a new team's coming in, this happened last year on the August complex, which was, a whole thing in itself because we had, 4 or 5 teams working on different branches and stuff, and all our data was shared through a single OneDrive folder in Teams. So the team on the South complex, started deleting stuff because, well, we don't need that for this area of the fire, but it was all connected. So make sure there's just good communication there when you're transitioning that, hey, all our data is stored here. These are the people that have access. These are the people that are, syncing. And again, if you set it up, if you're the first person there and you set it up with individual user access, like I went through with like individual named users, you do have a little bit more control over that than you do if it's just going out to the whole team.
Excellent. Another question here about, is there a GeoOps preference for the location for a QR code linked shared folder? At this point, we don't have anything like that for GeoOps, but it would make sense to have that probably into the products folder.
Yeah, we usually do it on the products. I mean, as long as it's in the same location, once you create that link, it doesn't matter because the QR code is always going to go there. It's kind of on the back end where you want to keep it in the right spot just to keep track of where things are. But as far as people that are scanning the code are concerned, they don't care where it is.
Okay. A little bit of clarification on one of the earlier comments about the synchronization and messing up one of the database files. Yeah, things can happen. The trick with using OneDrive and getting it to work right is practicing this before you go on assignment, so that you can understand how the synchronization works, what the effects are, that kind of stuff. You know, there's lots of little details in here, you know, and Jeremy kind of gave you a great overview and he put together an excellent document on how to set this up, but you really need to practice this before you go out on an incident rather than trying to figure out it on the fly. So.
Yeah, and if you have, if you don't have a FireNet account yet and you want to practice, like I mentioned, you can use your regular Gov account. Find, hopefully somebody else you work with. Although that's not as common as it used to be, but find somebody else that you can share a folder with and try moving stuff around or just putting empty Word documents or PDFs into different folders and see how it affects them or you as you're kind of working through stuff. Like I mentioned, down at the bottom you will see a laundry list of items that have been updated. The nice thing about that is as a if it's a big file and you're on a slow network, you can kind of see the little timer go up as it's syncing. So when I was doing remote sit last year, I could watch that and see, oh, here comes a PDF. 5 minutes later, I could see it was done. I could go look at it right away. So that kind of is the only place you can get notifications like that if you click on the cloud and see what's currently syncing or what has recently synced. Also, that's a good place to check for errors. If something comes up where it stops syncing, the whole part at the top where it says OneDrive is up to date will turn red, and it'll say OneDrive had an issue or you're currently signed out or whatever the error may be. It's not as intuitive. It doesn't always pop up the screen that says it's logged out or that it has an error, but you'll notice it down there with that little blue cloud icon.
And that was one of the things that got me certainly last year, was being logged out and not realizing it until you look at the system tray. We've heard that from a lot of different users that they got logged out with pretty much quietly without knowing, unless they look at that system tray. So that's kind of the first thing. If something doesn't seem quite right, check that. Check to make
just
sure
like
you're
with
logged in.
Teams or FireNet in general, it logs you out once a day. I would highly recommend getting the Authenticator app on your phone instead of getting the text code. That way, once you log in, you can just press approve and you don't have to worry about getting the text if you have bad network connection. Usually, obviously, you're going to be on some kind of internet connection. So if your phone's on Wi-Fi, you'll get the Authenticator message as well.
All right, any other questions from the audience? Ooh, a couple more came in. Some logging in and out questions. Should we stay logged into our FireNet account through OneDrive or only log into it when starting out for an incident? I don't think it really would matter. If you're going to an incident, just make sure you're logged into your OneDrive account, so that when you're doing the synchronization and stuff like that, that works. And some questions about the Authenticator app. Microsoft has an authenticator app. It's called Microsoft Authenticator that you can use with FireNet if you are off network. And I'm thinking there might be some information on their FireNet site about that. I'll have to look around and see if I can find some information about the Authenticator app. They recommend using that if you are not somewhere where there's cell service, where you can get your FireNet codes, because FireNet will ask you to sign in with your password as well as two-factor authentication with a code. I get it through my phone, which works great when I'm at home and have cell service, but if I'm going out on assignment, I need to deal with that. Let's see. All right. Well, excellent. Oh yeah, Jeremy's got some authenticators.
So yeah, I got it on the screen there. Assuming you already have a FireNet account, when you click on your My Account button in the upper right corner and go to the View My Account options on the account settings page, there's a security info section, and you can change the default method that you use to sign in. So it's two-factor authentication. You still sign in with your password in the browser or in OneDrive, and then as you can see, my default sign-in method is Authenticator. So it sends a notice to my phone, which that's my phone's name, I guess, serial number, to the app on my phone, and it lets me approve it from there. So by default, I think it is set to just text you a 6-digit number, which you can still see that in there, but I switched it to Authenticator. And you can put that on any device. It doesn't have to be your government phone, or if you don't have a government phone, you can use it on any Apple or Android device.
Another comment here about alternatively, you can set up a free Google Voice account and set that number as your primary two-factor authentication. I'm sure that probably works, but from an IT perspective, from a government IT perspective, I think that would probably be frowned on as far as, kind of setting up a workaround for the authentication side of things. So. All right. Log in for your Microsoft Authenticator information. How did you get to this page, Jeremy, that you're showing?
This was under FireNet. Here, let me back out all the way. So if you're in FireNet, or you're signed into FireNet, and you click on your little icon in the upper right corner, click on My Account under your username, and then Security Info. And I think there is, if it's not set up, I think it will walk you through the process of setting it up. Like Skip mentioned, I think it's also on the FireNet homepage. There is some instructions there as well.
Yeah, I was looking around for that. I'll try and find a link to the FireNet side of things.
There is a process of linking your app to your account that it has you go through. I can't remember what that is right now, but it does. You have to enter the same code on both devices, type of a thing. In the app itself, it gives you a code to enter on the website so it can link the two together.
Cool. Question here about how do you get access to the 2021 training incident team?
That's set up in FireNet. I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's open to anyone. Let me follow up with the FireNet admins about that, and we'll put a note on the forum about that.
Perfect. Thank you. There's a question here about FireNet logins. Yes, we get logged in and out a lot. Even though I had clicked to stay signed on, I would still have to sign on multiple times a day. Is there a reason why this happens, or am I just cursed? You're not cursed. You will be logged out automatically every 18 hours from FireNet. That is just a standard. That is something they have to do to meet the IT security requirements. So you shouldn't see it multiple times a day. You should see it once per shift. It was 24 hours a day last year. They changed to 18 now to kind of match up with that, 16-hour shift that we should all be working. So you should be able to log in once at the beginning of shift, and it should be good for your full shift.
Yeah, we were to try to avoid that during, busy times. We would have everyone in our section like physically go in and click the sign out button and sign in again, just to reset that timer around lunchtime, just so you wouldn't have to worry about it, hopefully, for the rest of the day. But yeah, it does seem kind of random, but I think it's tied to an 18-hour clock somewhere. It's always at the worst time, of course.
Totally. If you're being logged out more frequently than once a day, reach out to FireNet support and see if they can help troubleshoot why you're being logged in and out so many times. There could be something with your computer or with the account or something. So that's certainly not normal. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. And I will post the questions and the video from this to the learning portal here sometime this afternoon.
Thank you. And yeah, reach out through the portal or through the forum if you have any other questions, and we got a whole slew of people that can probably get those answered. So thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks. Take care.